There was a time when Pablo Picasso was the most radical painter in the West, long before he was a household name or a synonym for art itself. In the early 20th century, he created a succession of paintings that shocked the world. He splintered and distorted, deconstructed and stylized people and objects to the point that they were barely recognizable. In doing this, he became a central figure in the European avant-garde and in the artistic revolution known as modern art. He was possibly the most influential painter of the 20th century and a worldwide celebrity, to a degree not achievable by any visual artist living today. The significance of Picasso was not necessarily grounded in the paintings he made, but in who he was and what he did for art. Picasso came to represent the spirit of creativity. He was able to expand what art was and what it could be. Understanding why Picasso became so famous requires understanding how the mythology of Picasso got embedded in everything he made: the genius painter, the inventor of cubism and collage, the man with supreme self-confidence who could be magnetic and monstrous, the man with wives and mistresses half his age, posing in his underwear, working into his 90s, and creating 45,000 works of art that cover the gamut from depictions of poverty and war to erotic scenes involving Raphael and the Pope, and embracing the Minotaur as his savage alter ego. It's nearly impossible to look at a Picasso painting without thinking about the man who made it. His fame, narcissism, womanizing, and virtuosity have all become indelibly linked to his art. His longevity and prolific output helped make him probably the richest artist in history, leaving behind an estate worth estimated billions in today's money. His friends compared him to God and the devil. Picasso's lifelong friend Jaime Sabarte said, "If Picasso could detain the course of time, all clocks would stop, the hours would perish, days would come to an end, and Earth have to cease its revolutions and wait for him to change his mind." These scenes are from Henri-Georges Clouzot's The Mystery of Picasso, a film that set out to capture the mysteries of creativity. We see Picasso working both creatively and destructively. Figures form, disappear, and metamorphosize into other objects. There's a balance here between instinct and intellect. He's embracing possibilities, that this image could have taken 1,000 different forms, the final image only seeming possible because of a particular path chosen. Picasso felt that a painting was never finished. Something could always be added. To finish it, he said, means to be through with it, to kill it, to rid it of its soul and give it its final blow. Picasso once explained that reality lies in how you see things. A green parrot is also a green salad. He who makes it only a parrot diminishes its reality. A painter who copies a tree blinds himself to the real tree. I see things otherwise. A palm tree can become a horse. Don Quixote can come into Las Meninas, referring to this 17th century icon of Baroque painting by Diego Velázquez, a fellow Spaniard. Picasso's stylization and abstraction allow an image to house multiple meanings, multiple realities all at once. These meanings can be locked inside the puzzle, waiting to be ferreted out and argued over. Here we see Picasso painting on glass, working both quickly and decisively. But this stylized visual language was developed over a lifetime of trial and experimentation. Picasso endlessly reinvented the human form. Or as art critic Peter Schjeldahl once put it, Picasso re-engineered the female body as an ensemble of strictly erogenous parts. Ever aware of the camera, he's giving a performance here. We can see how the instinctive process becomes an important part of the art, and how Picasso himself becomes part of the art. Sentiments like Picasso the genius or Picasso the old man with young lovers guide our interpretation of the art. Picasso seems delighted by his own agility with a brush, delighted by his own brilliance. And there's something childlike about his mature art. It's as if Picasso spent his career unlearning the academic painting he was prized for as a youth, unburdening himself from the constraints of traditional, realistic painting, instead relishing his primal instincts. For Picasso, embodying the Minotaur, the half-man, half-bull of Greek myth, wasn't just an expression of virility or illicit desire, but an attempt to connect to some primordial dimension of the psyche. A sentiment that is probably similar to the way that Picasso had been captivated by the beauty, violence, and cruelty of bullfighting since childhood, the bloody theater being seen as a core element of his Spanishness. And his foray into sculpture, something he was not schooled in, really distills his raw creative energy. I think precisely because he wasn't constrained by convention. And the same goes for his novel experiments with collage, the invention of a new art form, the creative act becoming as important as the art itself. In the public imagination, Picasso's creative talent becomes simply part of his nature. Picasso was considered a child prodigy, and reportedly could draw and paint faster and easier than anyone else around him. He could paint in any style, and where many other artists might have been plagued by self-doubt, I think Picasso believed in himself and his own genius, which allowed the world to believe in him, and helped create a court of followers who served him like a king. There's a mysticism that often surrounds prodigious talent, the idea that it's a gift beyond explanation. Picasso began his painting career with a very traditional academic approach, schooled by his art professor father, and was already fairly masterful by his early teens. He painted First Communion when he was 14 years old. It clearly shows his ability to render a highly realistic scene. The fabric glows with light and flows naturalistically over the girl, his sister Lola. The subject is unambiguous. The subject matter is unambiguous. It has all the trappings of classical, academic art. This is a painting that was designed to appeal to the conservative taste of a juried exhibition. Picasso had studied the old masters and had a command of the techniques innovated centuries earlier. But masters like Velázquez or Caravaggio were innovative artists in their day. Picasso was far too ambitious to simply emulate Velázquez. He wanted to be a Velázquez. And so his career would not be rooted in the past or in the conformity of academic painting. Picasso outgrew his father's teaching and mocked what he called the stupidities of closed-minded art professors at the Royal Academy in Madrid. And all the cutting-edge art was happening in Paris. So in the year 1900, just before his 19th birthday, that's where Picasso went, to live the libertine life and join the revolution in art. By 1907, Picasso was already regarded as one of the leaders of modern art in France. In the spring of that year, he painted Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, a breakthrough work of art, and a moment that is now regarded as cataclysmic in art history. The large-scale painting, which Picasso privately referred to as My Brothel, was an in-your-face depiction of nude prostitutes posing provocatively and unapologetically. The carnal subject matter and the flat, shattered glass style of the painting was scandalous when first shown in 1916. People found it immoral and ugly, the opposite of what most people thought art should be at the time. But it was also transfixing and unforgettable, and unlike anything anyone in France had seen before. The women's confrontational stares, bodies sharp, angular, and refracted, a subversion of traditional female beauty in classical aesthetics. Picasso offers no illusion of space, depth, or light. The whole frame is compressed, cut up, and disorienting. The painting seems to mix styles without cohesion. The hard geometry is somehow both erotic and desexualized, and many people had a hard time even describing what they were looking at, beyond 5 naked women and some dangerous-looking fruit. Picasso's brothel made radical, groundbreaking works by Cézanne and Matisse look classical and serene in comparison. And Matisse, who was a rebel painter in his own right, and Picasso's rival, considered Les Demoiselles d'Avignon a crime against art. Manet's Olympia, a previous depiction of a prostitute staring back at the viewer, was provocative in its day, but it's also painterly and sumptuous. European art, in fact, was full of brothels, harems, and courtesans, and the mere depiction of sexuality, of course, was not revolutionary. Critic John Berger wrote in 1965, "We probably tend to underestimate the brutality of Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. All his friends who saw it in Picasso's studio were at first shocked by it, and it was meant to shock. It was a raging frontal attack, not against sexual immorality, but against life as Picasso found it. The waste, the disease, the ugliness, and the ruthlessness of it. A brothel may not in itself be shocking, but women painted without charm or sadness, without irony or social comment. Women painted like the palings of a stockade, through which eyes look out as at a death. That is shocking." According to Berger's interpretation, the painting was not just an attack on the traditional female nude and Western painting, but on civilization itself. The impact of Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, of course, was not fully understood in 1907, and really, the meaning of the work is still the subject of debate. The writer Miles Unger wrote that Les Demoiselles d'Avignon was the ultimate revenge on Picasso's father, Don José, who, like his peers and son, frequented brothels and was lewd in private life but prim and proper in public. Such hypocrisy infuriated Picasso. It was not so much a moral feeling as it was a failure of artistic courage that led to aesthetic sterility. John Berger spoke of the painting in existential terms, but he and others also wrote about Picasso's fear of STDs. Picasso had bouts with venereal disease, and as a result of a near-death experience with scarlet fever and the death of his sister to diphtheria, had a pathological fear of infection. The motif of blindness in Picasso's pictures at the time was probably connected to an actual fear of blindness as the result of a syphilis infection. There's no single reading of Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and no definitive take. The impulse to make something often begins with just a feeling. But we do know many of Picasso's inspirations and references for the painting. We know Picasso had an early obsession with El Greco, and we know Picasso had seen and been wholly taken with El Greco's apocalyptic The Opening of the Fifth Seal while working on Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. The naked souls with arms raised, stylized distortions, and unnerving tone are echoed in Picasso's painting. Cézanne's geometric simplification was a huge influence on Picasso, and his 1906 painting The Bathers was made the previous year. Picasso explicitly cited the influence of ancient Iberian sculpture, which is native to modern-day Spain. This influence is seen most clearly in the two center figures. The mysterious and so-called primitive Mediterranean art was a kind of way out of conventional aesthetics for Picasso, and resonated with his Spanish roots. As it turned out, Picasso was in possession at the time of two Iberian sculpted heads. As the story goes, Picasso had a sociopath acquaintance named Jerry Pirret. Pirret had reportedly heard how enthralled Picasso was with the Iberian sculptures at the Louvre, and went to the museum in a trench coat and stole two of them. He sold one to Picasso for 50 francs, and because Picasso had refused to buy the other, threw in the second one for free. This transaction would cause Picasso to become a suspect in the 1911 theft of the Mona Lisa, at which point he returned the stolen heads anonymously. The figures on the right, framed by blue curtains, were likely inspired by African tribal art from the Trocadero Ethnographic Museum in Paris. Picasso had recently visited the museum and found the art, which was so different from Western art, and which he likely had very little knowledge of, to have immense expressive power. By the turn of the last century, African art objects were common in Europe as the result of imperial conquest. These objects had a profound effect on Western art as European artists searched for new forms of representation. Similar to how the Impressionists mined Japanese prints a few decades earlier. Sadly, the vast majority of Africa's cultural heritage is believed to exist in Europe. Some European museums have recently begun to return art stolen during colonial rule. Picasso would later deny the influence of African art on Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, even though the evidence is pretty undeniable. Aside from the remarkable similarity his art of this period bears to African art, and the fact that Picasso started collecting African art in his Paris studio around this time. He said this after visiting the Trocadero Museum. To examine these masks, all those objects that people had created with a sacred and magical purpose, to serve as intermediaries between them and the unknown and hostile forces that surrounded them, thereby trying to overcome their fears, giving them color and shape. And then I understood what painting really meant. It is not an aesthetic process. It is a form of magic that stands between us and the hostile universe, a means of taking power, imposing a form on our terrors as well as our wishes. The day I understood that, I found my way. People will argue over whether Picasso adapted, borrowed, or stole from African art, but it seems it shaped his artistic vision in a deep way, and in a sense set him free. After visiting the Trocadero Museum, Picasso repainted the two figures on the right that had originally looked Iberian in influence, arguably giving the painting its single most powerful and uncanny attribute from the point of view of Westerners. Picasso was interested in the spiritual power of art, not just in novelty or the way things look. This is the critical insight that Picasso seems to have taken from the Trocadero Museum, that an artwork can be a tool, a weapon as he put it, to fight the spirits of the world and achieve independence, and not just an aesthetic object to be pored over by connoisseurs. By integrating form and function, an artist can become a kind of exorcist. The best reason one can give for Picasso's denial of the influence of African art on Les Demoiselles d'Avignon is the protection of his myth, that admitting the source of his inspiration would tarnish his reputation for originality, especially because it was Henri Matisse who first drew Picasso's attention to African art with a small wooden figurine from the Congo. Today, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon is considered by art historians to be the most important painting of the 20th century. But the question of whether it's a good painting is almost irrelevant. Yes, the painting has a kind of intrinsic power to it. But how do you evaluate a painting that seems to intentionally undermine the standards by which art was judged at the time? For Picasso, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon may have been motivated by personal discovery, or ambition, or wanting to outdo the competition with a great masterpiece. But in terms of art history, the painting stands for cutting down the past. There was a general sense at the time that a new kind of art was needed to match the social and technological innovations of the modern world. Picasso's painting opened a door. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon opened up all kinds of formal possibilities. It inspired Cubism, and instigated a whole progression of art movements that were not chained to the standards of the past. André Breton saw Picasso not only as the inventor of Cubism, but also as the precursor to the psychological investigations of surrealism. Famously, Alfred Barr, the first director of the Museum of Modern Art, drew a flowchart showing the influence of Cubism on abstract art. The chart is kind of funny to look at with all its interwoven streams of isms, and it shows how difficult it is to rationalize artists and movements. But it did help convince people of Cubism's pivotal role in the development of later art movements, and by extension, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Picasso actually claimed he wasn't interested in the evolution of art towards some end or ideal. He said, "All I've ever made was made for the present." And he certainly didn't want to reduce his art to some rational description. Picasso disliked theories and explanations about art, as if none of Picasso's achievements were the result of study and investigation, but instead were the result of an archaic, mystic belief in the self. It's important to understand, however, that Picasso's academic training was an essential component of his artistic formation. He had to learn the rules to truly transgress them. Picasso was born into a rapidly modernizing world. Painters were pushing the boundaries of art, pushing what was acceptable to paint, and redefining what constituted good taste and good art. Revolutionary fervor swept across Europe in the mid-1800s. In 1848, the same year that France had its February Revolution, and Marx and Engels published the Communist Manifesto, French painter Gustave Courbet began painting working-class people on a grand scale, formerly reserved for classical heroes. In just 50 years, painting transitioned from the subtle abstraction of Manet to the near pure abstraction of Picasso in his Cubism period. And as radical as Picasso was, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and Cubism were just the beginning of a new era of radical art. Artists like Piet Mondrian and Kazimir Malevich, inspired by Picasso, would push painting well beyond the realm of the physical world and into pure abstraction. So whether Picasso believed in the progress, evolution, or development of art or not, he was probably the single most important component of the modern art revolution in the 20th century, long before he became the 800-pound gorilla of modern art. As Picasso aged, his celebrity and wealth soared to new heights. He bought large villas in the south of France and had affairs with younger and younger women relative to his own age. To many, fame began to inform his art more than the other way around. And aside from Cubism, Picasso wasn't really part of art movements and operated more like a singular entity. In Clouseau's film, we see a Picasso who is no longer on the cutting edge of art, having rejected much of the European and American abstract art he had precipitated. He's still a great painter, he's just not part of the conversation the way he once was. In 1964, Picasso's one-time partner, Françoise Gilot, wrote Life with Picasso and exposed the world to another side of the Spaniard. Gilot describes Picasso as a brilliant artist, but also as cruel and self-absorbed, Gilot was an artist herself, and her art career was intentionally stunted by Picasso, who was controlling and possessive. She quotes Picasso as saying, "As far as I'm concerned, other people are like those little grains of dust, floating in the sunlight. It only takes the push of a broom, and out they go." Picasso tried to prevent the publication of the book, and future Picasso biographer John Richardson condemned the book for sensationalizing Picasso's personal life. Picasso wasn't able to control Gilot like other women, and she was the only woman who ever left him. In 2001, Picasso's granddaughter Marina wrote in her own book, "No one in my family ever managed to escape the stranglehold of this genius. He submitted them to his animal sexuality, tamed them, bewitched them, ingested them, and crushed them onto his canvas." When we look at the twisted and distorted depictions of his wives and lovers, these revelations make it even harder to separate the paintings from the man who made them. Of the 7 main women in Picasso's life, 2 committed suicide and 2 went mad. According to Marina Picasso, her grandfather's brilliant oeuvre demanded human sacrifices.